Thank you very much, Acting Speaker. Look, I wanted to take the opportunity to discuss this motion of private members' business today because, as has been outlined, government speakers here on this motion have pointed to a number of initiatives that the government has put in place that they want to highlight have had positive impacts. The member for Durack spoke about the youth allowance changes. Most members, the member for O'Connor did as well, things like the Clontarf program. But what they've ignored is that that is so massively outweighed by what has been done in slashing the overall funding bucket for not only schools but also for vocational education and training, and I've yet to hear much discussion about that. So I want to have an opportunity today to talk about that directly. First of all, in terms of where we are with schools funding, and I note the member for Durack in her opening address referred to the $30 billion that was cut from schools as complete fantasy. Well, it would be absolutely true to describe most people's reactions to the last two Abbott government budgets as a complete nightmare. There has been $30 billion cut from schools in this nation. It's in their own budget papers. It's not difficult to find. It's even put into a simple graph so that you can see exactly what those cuts are. And you don't have to take our word for it. Go and chat to some of your particularly National Party colleagues in some of the states and ask them what they think about those two budgets and the impacts on schools, and I'll come to that in a moment. So across Australia, what the government's walking away from their commitments mean is that there's about 1.5 million country students, and they are facing over the next 10 years a cut of $12.5 billion in funding for their schools. In my own Illawarra region, that's about $391 million cut from our schools over the next 10 years. And so the result of that, of course, is that, as previous members have indicated, there is a gap, a disadvantage factor for students from regional, rural and remote Australia compared to their city-based colleagues, and we should be focused on closing that by putting in place the sort of needs-based funding that David Gonski and his panel, after extensive investigation, recommended. And indeed, that's what everybody thought they were getting prior to the election. The signs are out all over the place, you know, vote for us, vote Liberal, vote National. You get exactly the same on Gonski funding as you would with Labor. Unfortunately, as with so much campaigning by the then Abbott opposition, apparently we had to read the fine print, which said only for the first 4 years. And of course, the vast bulk of funding rolled in years 5 and 6. And so that wasn't advertised. I still can't find the fine print on those posters myself, but maybe somebody else can point it out to me. And on top of that, of course, the across-the-board funding cuts that occurred in the budget. So this is actually what the sizeable impact of this government's policies have been on regional and rural schooling. And it is a sector of our all of our states that can least afford it. And as I said, I just want to point out the leader of the now leader of the National Party before the election said, in his own words, "I believe without a shadow of a doubt we will continue to commit to Gonski past the first term." You can find that in the Northern Daily Leader from September 2013. Well, his New South Wales colleague, Minister Pickley, was very unimpressed with his federal colleagues. In 2014, after the budget, he said, in his own words, "Not only is this a breach of commitment to New South Wales, it is a breach of faith with all school students in the state. Schools in regional areas, as well as disadvantaged and Aboriginal students, will be the hardest hit." That's in his own media release of June 2014. So let's go to the vocational education sector, where we have seen $2 billion in support cut out of this sector, and yet it is in regional and remote Australia that the biggest percentage of students actually go into vocational education training. In regional and remote areas, it's 8.5% of students go into the vet sector. And yet we have seen, since between 2012 and 2014, a 13% decline in the number of students from inner and outer regional and remote areas enrolled in vocational training, and this is a direct result of the sort of slashing cuts that this government has been making, the ignorance of TAFE and the capacity for it to deliver for regional and rural.
I thank the member for